The death toll from Germany's devastating flood disaster has risen to more than 160 as emergency workers continue to search for dozens of people still unaccounted for. Some experts say it was a failure of Germany's flood warning system that led to such widespread devastation. They say authorities knew what was coming but failed to prepare.
Among the many questions these floods have left in their wake is one about the warnings. Did people understand that lives were in danger from heavy rainfall? Those who were there say information was chaotic.
A
fire service vehicle came through, but you couldn't understand what they were saying. I asked a neighbour. He said we should turn off the electricity because water was coming, but nobody realised it would be a flood more than 2 meters high.
Da hat keiner mit gerechnet.
There were advance warnings about heavy rain and so on, but some of the warnings were wrong. They told us there was another flood coming, so we went up the hill, but there was nothing.
Da sind wir alle in den Weinbergen gegangen und naja, es kam gar nichts, ne?
But the head of the National Disaster Response Agency, visiting the region on Monday, said the system had worked well.
Our
warning system worked in each and every case. The German Weather Service, the flood centres and the local authorities made intensive use of it. 150 warning signals were sent via our system. Some of those warnings were sent out using phone apps, but a nationwide test of the system in 2020 showed that does not always work. Some warnings came through half an hour late. Germany also has a more old-fashioned network of sirens from Cold War days. Many of these have been dismantled in recent years, but around 15,000 are still in operation. Yet even such a simple technology is not foolproof. They sound the siren once every month, but not when something like this happens. I don't understand it. In view of so many deaths, it's not surprising some people are demanding changes. But for now, the main task is to clean up and to begin to learn the lessons.
Our reporter Giulia Saudelli is on the ground covering the latest developments. She joins us from the town of Altenahr in the German state of Rhineland-Palatinate, which was especially hard hit by the flooding. So, Giulia, what is the situation there today?
Yes, it's going to be another day of cleaning up for the residents here and for the volunteers who came to help. The lower part of town here behind me, which is along the river, has been completely destroyed. A road has been swept away. A bus over here has landed on the shore. So the amount of devastation is really astounding. And one has to imagine that so many towns like this one have an equally high level of destruction. So the tragedy is really widespread here in the region, and it's not just a tragedy of destruction of objects, it's also the loss of human life. So here in the state of Rhineland-Palatinate, 117 people have been found dead so far. Many are still missing, and unfortunately the authorities expect the death toll to rise still while they are clearing up the cellars and the destroyed homes, and they expect to find more bodies.
So cleanup efforts are underway there, but I understand many residents in the area are still enduring tough conditions. Tell us more about that.
Yes, many people here have lost everything. They have lost their home. They have lost their livelihoods because restaurants, shops, hotels have all been destroyed, and many people are very worried for their immediate future, also in economic terms. But even the people who were lucky and whose homes are still intact have a hard time living here. There's no electricity, there's no gas, there's no water. So it's really hard to charge one's phone, to wash up after the cleanup, or even to find a functioning toilet.
Now, we heard some angry voices in that report just a moment ago, people saying they were given insufficient warning about this flood. Are authorities considering any changes to the warning system as a result of this disaster?
Well, what we've heard until now is both federal and local authorities saying that their prevention and warning system worked, that they did send out warnings to the population and that they knew that this was coming. They said there might be some lessons to be learned, but now is not the moment to be looking at that. But here on the ground, speaking to people, it feels like the communication was at least spotty. Some people said the firemen came and warned them and they ran to the hills. Others said the firemen came too late and there was nowhere for them to go, while others didn't grasp the extent of the flooding that was about to hit them.
Giulia, thank you very much for your reporting. That was Giulia Saudelli there in Altenahr. Our reporter Emily Gordine is on the ground covering the latest developments. She joins us now from the town of Schönau in the southern German state of Bavaria. So, Emily, what's the situation where you are today?
So right now we're in an area that was evacuated in light of the floods on Saturday. And now what you see behind me is people tidying up. You can see behind me here on my right is the mud that came down from the hill together with the flood. Literally reached until the windowsills here, and you can see diggers trying to free the area of the mud that came down. You can see the relief agency, the Federal Relief Agency, the THW, working in line with the local fire brigade. And even if you look on my left here now, what you will see as well is that the military, from the local base here, came as well to help to dig the gardens and what people had, out of the mud. So it's a very tense situation. People still can't quite come to terms with what has happened because this is extreme. And, and at the same time, it's all hands on deck. People are distributing little sandwiches to thank the helpers that are here. So it is intense, but people are trying to really just get on with it.
Now, the flooding did claim lives in Bavaria, I understand, but not nearly as many as in neighboring states. Was that just a matter of luck or the result of better disaster preparedness?
Well, I spoke with a leader here of the local fire brigade, and he said that it also comes down to just being a bit of a scaredy cat. As soon as they hear of big torrential rain, then they immediately, they act. But also he said that it has to do with the settlement structure here, right? So this area where we're in right now has about 20 to 30 houses, and then there comes nothing for a while, and then you have again settlements of 20 to 30 houses. So the extent is going to be smaller. And at the same time, what you need to know here is that this is still an extraordinary situation. We're standing here at the cusp of a hill, of a mountain, really. And usually if there's like a little stream coming down the hill, that'll then be bigger and turn into a flood, really. But this mountain here doesn't even have a really big, a stream where you could say, oh, we can expect more rain to come down here. So if you look to my right here, where the mud is and everything, this is where this huge stream must have come down. And because of the torrential rain, because it was so strong, it took with it little rocks and everything, debris with it. So it really turned into this sort of flood to go a landslide. So it is really quite extraordinary what's happened here.
And just briefly, Emily, there's been massive loss of property there, destruction of property. People have lost their homes, their livelihoods. What kind of help can they expect from authorities?
Well, on the federal level, they have promised to put up to 300 million euros in relief, but that is for all of Germany, so not just for Bavaria. Bavaria itself has promised about 50 million. So there is help, but at the same time, floods aren't necessarily uncommon in this area. The big issue that was dealt with a few years ago, or that came up, is, how much does the state pay and how much should people prepare for it in terms of insurance? And some of the help that is being put forward from the state is also, dependent on whether people have insurance. But if you're living in a flood-prone area, then your insurance is going to be extremely high, and not everyone can afford it. And in some areas even, it's the question of, will insurances even put up with the risk? So that's the question that needs to be solved in the future.
Emily, thank you very much. DW's Emily Gordine there, reporting from Schönau, Bavaria. And joining us now from Luxembourg is Jeff de Costa. He's a researcher focusing on flood warning systems at the University of Reading. Thanks for being with us. So, German authorities insist their flood warnings worked, even though there was massive loss of life. What's your assessment? Did the warning system function the way it was intended?
Well, thank you for this great question. Actually, if we look at the aftermath of last week's disaster, it is quite evident that the warning systems were not successful in the way that maybe the German authorities would have hoped that they would have been. So I do think there are certain problems with the ways that this crisis was dealt with, and warning systems were not effectively issued.
Okay, so there are problems there, you say. What lessons, then, do you think should be learned from this disaster when it comes to flood warnings?
I mean, there should be a coordinated effort and a clear transmission line between the warnings given by scientists and the decisions that are taken by decision makers on the ground. This is problematic that is not specific to Germany, but it is a worldwide phenomenon. Some countries deal with it better than others. But in this crisis, we have clearly seen that this is not a localized phenomenon. And it's really important that now we come together and try to find ways in how we can protect ourselves and prevent further such outcomes or even worse.
You've been personally affected, I understand, by events as your family home in Luxembourg was flooded. Can you tell us a bit more about what happened there?
Absolutely. It came, my parents called me very late at night. They were very distressed. And I went there as fast as I could and as safely as I could to help them bail water out. But it was a sad scene to see. I mean, it was my childhood home, all the memories submerged underwater, and just to see how emotionally draining it is also for flood victims. It's a sad reminder of just how devastating floods are on people and societies as a whole.
Can you tell us, in a situation like this, how the flood warning system is supposed to work? I mean, assuming that that those who were monitoring conditions actually knew what was coming, how is that supposed to be communicated to the people on the ground to get them out of harm's way?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So there are flood warnings in place that are pan-European, but also local authorities like weather services, for instance, in Germany as well, that issued warnings that were just as accurate as the pan-European warning system, notification system, apologies. And the thing is, it's not just about the warning, but also about the preparedness and how resilient the population is in terms of the vulnerabilities that they have and the exposure to risk that they have. This is an assessment that needs to be made, and the decisions need to be taken according to these vulnerabilities based on the warnings that decision makers get. And it shouldn't be up to them to decide whether a situation is dangerous for their inhabitants or for the citizens of that particular place. In order to make a wise decision about to evacuate or not to evacuate. People need to be prepared. There needs to be an educational part in which people know exactly what to do in case of a crisis. Because as we all know, when there is an emergency situation, people do not react rationally. So especially if something comes as a surprise, people need to have this sort of knowledge beforehand, sort of like a fire drill, if you will. We all train for a fire drill in case of an emergency, right. So that we know what to do in case panic strikes. We know exactly what we have to do. And this is sadly not the case, not just here, but everywhere across Europe and beyond.
I think there's going to be a lot more discussion about this coming. Jeff de Costa from the University of Reading, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.